Hi, this is Abdul Bharti and welcome to another episode of TFI Newsroom. And today we have with us team from Sysdig, Loris, and Kris. Can you please introduce yourself before we talk about Falco and incubation and CNCF?
My name is Loris Degioanni, and I'm the CTO and founder of Sysdig. Sysdig makes security and visibility tools for cloud-native containers and Kubernetes.
My name is Kris Nova, Chief Open Source Advocate at Sysdig, currently leading up the Falco project and just been in the ecosystem for a long time.
Awesome. So I'm curious, that what does incubation really mean for the project itself, for the users of the projects, the customers of Sysdig, and the overall community? What difference does it make that a project is now in the incubation stage versus yet another project at CNCF?
I think moving to incubation is a large sign that the project is maturing and that folks are really adopting the project. It's very hard to get to the incubation stage in the CNCF, and it requires going through a vote. And I think just in general, as folks continue to start looking at cloud native security, having an incubated runtime security tool is going to be critical for them moving forward.
From the team point of view, incubation is the culmination of an effort that the Falco team, based on members that are within Sysdig and within other companies, work that they've done across essentially the last couple of years to build a solid product, work with the community, take care of the users. And so it's also for the team itself a reason to celebrate and be happy, because this essentially validates the work that have been done and validates the adoption that Falco is having.
Awesome. And as Kris was mentioning, they know it's a complicated, hard process. So I'm just curious about what are the criteria that a project has to meet to kind of either graduate or qualify as at the incubation stage?
We had to go through a due diligence process where we described adoption and how we were able to work with other folks in the community and how we were able to keep the project as vendor neutral as possible, and just in general be a good open source citizen and a healthy open source project. And then I think there's also this concept of like general consensus of like what's behind Falco, what's behind runtime security in general. And I think, as that idea is starting to surface, we're starting to explore that more and more. It's really proving out to be like a viable resource and a useful tool for folks in the community.
Just wanted to give maybe a little bit of context on, let's say, CNCF and what essentially are the stages. Falco just went to incubation. In CNCF essentially hosts many projects that are related to cloud native, and there are three stages. Typically, you enter CNCF as a sandbox project, and this is essentially the first level, and is the one where the bar to be accepted is the lowest. So CNCF accepts you and gives you essentially an opportunity to grow as a member of the CNCF family. The second stage after sandbox is incubation, and incubation is when things are becoming more serious, because incubated projects are projects that have been vetted quite heavily by the technical committee, the TOC of the CNCF. And as I was saying, this is the stage where Falco is right now. And then the last stage is graduation. And, big projects for example, Kubernetes are the ones that are in graduation. And these are the ones that have shown, substantial community, substantial stability, and substantial adoption. We're very excited because we're stage number 2. Of course, we know that there's still a lot of work to do before we reach graduation.
And so that leads to my next question. That is like, when do you expect that you'll be graduated? Or is there a time frame, or because you have already passed some of the one of the most toughest criteria in this stage? So what it takes for a project to graduate, and is there a time frame?
Fundamentally, you would be able to propose like a document to move to graduation after 1 year of being in incubation. For us, we're currently focusing on building out an API, making Falco more modular, more consumable. And, as we start moving forward over the next 12 months, we're going to start exploring what it means to move to graduation and what we would like to accomplish before we make that move.
rather than a specific timeline. For us, it's more like goals for the project. It's not like we let's put it this way: we don't consider this a race. It's more like we consider Falco being part of the CNCF, first of all, a privilege, and then a tool for us to reach a broader community and make our software Falco better. So we have specific goals for that, and these goals largely are based on making Falco a very strong part of the cloud native and Kubernetes ecosystem. So hence the APIs, integrations, and all of this kind of stuff. And when that is completed, I think we would be in a good shape. Also because this will definitely grow the adoption of the product. So for the moment, we don't have a specific timeline in front of us.
What kind of community is around Falco? Because I think having a community around also plays a big role in graduation of a project or acceptance in CNCF.
We have a very rich open source community. We primarily work out of Slack, and we have a CNCF sponsored mailing list. And every Wednesday morning, 8 a.m. Pacific, we do open source calls, and we alternate between doing like an office hours, which is a friendly invitation to come and just bring up any issues you might have. And then the other one, of course, being more of like a positive planning experience where we actually go through the issue tracker. We talk to folks in the community. We understand what folks need to be worked on, and we start to assign work out to various folks in the community. As far as contributors, we've seen people from all over the world come and join the calls, participate in the Slack, get involved with the mailing list. And we're even working on doing some case studies with the CNCF right now with some of our other adopters as well. I also did a talk at KubeCon with one of our production users, Frame.io, where you can go and you can find out more about how they're using Falco and see a little bit more about exactly concretely what Falco can do and hear a little bit of the history coming from how the whole project started.
I just wanted to complete what Kris was saying with in terms of numbers. Currently, the Falco community counts 64 committers, 40 integrations, over 2,000 GitHub stars, 55 contributors, including people from companies like Frame.io, Shopify, Snapchat, Booz Allen, Hamilton. And in terms of downloads, we have around 8.5 million Docker hub pulls. So, just raw numbers in case people are interested.
What kind of resources does CNCF provide to the projects which are in incubation stage?
So this is one of the very exciting parts about moving to incubation. Now that we've officially moved to incubation and we've been voted in, we have more resources around marketing and branding Falco, and moving forward, we're really looking forward to doing everything we can publicly to encourage folks to come, get involved, join the project, and help make runtime security a first-class effort in the CNCF.
Now let's switch from CNCF incubation about in general, the security landscape, in the cloud native world. What does it look like? Because traditionally, security is often considered as an afterthought by developers. It's a totally different field altogether. But now we are seeing DevSecOps, and because of this whole agile model, you can very easily, put security in your CI/CD pipeline and move faster compared to looking at a big monolith. So first, I'm curious about the concerns or worries or awareness people have regarding security in the cloud native world. And then second question would be around how it's easier for them to embrace these practices.
So first of all, software systems are becoming more and more powerful, more and more automated, but also more complex every day, right? So from one point of view, a lot of what we needed to do in the past for security with ecosystems like Kubernetes, a lot comes essentially as part of the platform. And that's really great. So from one point of view, we have essentially an additional complexity and the additional amount of risks. From the other point of view, we have, in my opinion, a new way to approach the problem that is much more powerful in the past. In particular, you were mentioning DevSecOps, for example. Sysdig sees security as essentially 3 phases: build, run, respond. Security starts essentially when you're building your software, starting making sure that essentially you don't include dependencies that maybe have vulnerabilities, or that you don't introduce and push, into your environments code that is insecure. Then there's the runtime phase, because you cannot catch everything just during the CI/CD pipeline, and this is where Falco really shines. And where Falco fits essentially in the idea. And then there's the response, because based on the complexity of these modern software components, understanding what was the blast radius and investigate after the fact becomes very important, because containers go and disappear very quickly, right? So a good way to approach security needs to cover all of these three stages. What's interesting, and the reason why, for example, Sysdig as a company and Falco as a team has invested in building an open source solution, is that the approach nowadays is much more community driven. So as a team, as the Falco team, we strongly believe that it's much more effective nowadays to build a solution that is like a point solution like Falco, that solves a specific problem like runtime very well and can be plugged into essentially a more complete ecosystem that is that welcomes both, open source tools and commercial tools to just create a complete solution. That is really the best way to build software, and that is a big departure from the traditional approach of security vendors, which is very much like security by obscurity, right? And try to be as proprietary and as close as possible. This is absolutely the opposite, essentially, of the Kubernetes community. And so we thought that security-wise, since we really like the completely open approach of Kubernetes and the ecosystem around Kubernetes, like Prometheus and Istio and everything else, we thought that runtime security needed to be built that way as well. And that's how we built Falco, essentially.
So I think for me, and probably the entire reason I'm even here at Sysdig and even working on Falco is because I noticed there was a gap in the ecosystem, right? So right now, if you look at Kubernetes and the way that we approach RBAC and access control, and even tools like OPA and Gatekeeper, where we do policy enforcement, I think that's by far, hands down, the first best step at securing the system. But I think there's still a hole that needs to be filled otherwise, which is how do we detect anomalies at a different layer, and then how do we respond to those, like what Loris was saying. So if you look at even the vulnerabilities in the Kubernetes dashboard, right? This is an application that no matter how secure your prevention technique would have been, you still could have deployed this application on Kubernetes. And this is where I think tools like Falco and runtime security really shine, is being able to detect at the kernel layer and then boil that up to user land so that we can have this happy harmony between both prevention and detection avenues. And for me, solving this problem is very exciting and has yet to be solved. And I think that's why I'm here.
What are the unique challenges that are there in today's, the modern applications? I mean, we look at, bank fraud, all those things happen in the real time, or something enters your network. But, as we are moving in the cloud native world, and Teslas or whatever you talk about, a lot of things are happening in real time. How does it make it even more challenging for security companies or security projects like Falco or Sysdig?
First of all, issue number one is by nature, orchestrated container based infrastructures like the ones that are run by Kubernetes tend to be very powerful, but also a little bit more opaque. Because every single tiny one of your components is isolated in a pod, which is pretty much typically a container, which is orchestrated by something like Kubernetes and can run essentially anywhere and can be moved or turned or a new one can be turned on, essentially on a second by second basis. So there's, first of all, an element of a little bit of opacity. So one of the problems that Falco solves is how do you see inside your pods, inside your containers to get together this data, because that's not trivial, in this modern environment. And if you don't, you're completely blind, which is very bad, because blindness is the opposite of being able to secure your infrastructures. And the other one is complexity. So, you used to have pets, so servers, and now you have locusts. You have tiny little things that you have millions of them that are moving very fast and that are essentially communicating with each other to implement your service based on multiple hops. So reducing this complexity by understanding essentially the way an orchestrator like Kubernetes organizes things and detecting threats and reporting threats in a way that is telling you, this is a problem in your credit card service validation in production, rather than on a container with this ID, is very important. So if I can, categorize the two pain points that we try to address as a team with Falco, I would say one is collecting the best possible data in an environment that is a little bit antagonistic to collect rich data. And the one is making sense of the data by essentially understanding what this data mean at a logical level and not only at the physical, like kernel system call container level.
Right, yeah. Kris?
Another thing that's important to point out here is the complexity of a system goes beyond the scope of the orchestrator, right? I feel like there's this belief that says, oh, it's running in Kubernetes and I don't have to concern myself with anything below Kubernetes. And if you look at the way a Linux system works, or even just break down Kubernetes in general, it's a Docker daemon being watched with systemd, right? It's still, at the end of the day, a Linux process. So being able to audit and understand the entirety of a system, I think, is important to have a truly safe and secure system here, which is where I think Falco stands up with our ability to audit at the kernel level.
So when we look at Falco as a project, you talked about the kind of community that is already there, vibrant community, but how do you further plan to either engage more people? Also, there may be a lot of security is not everybody's cup of tea, but how do you really plan to get more people involved and how to grow the community beyond what it is right now?
Pull requests accepted. We're here, we're working every day. We would just have open arms for anyone interested to get involved, whether you're an engineer, a user, an operator. We're working every day from everything from refactoring our build process to actually writing lines of C and C++ to even working out a new API written in Go so that we can implement tooling downstream.
Loris, I'm curious, what we have been talking all about open source. I'm curious, what value does company likes, because this is, if I'm not wrong, you have created multiple companies before Sysdig. Why are you still doing open source?
Yeah, I've built companies before, and they've all been companies based on an open source / open core model. I'm a strong believer of the model, especially nowadays. I see from one point of view, definitely software moving to the cloud. But I also see a next generation of cloud software. Cloud computing was started and largely still is based on running your workloads on, let's say, proprietary infrastructures based on proprietary APIs that are offered by competing commercial vendors, essentially. And there are a couple of problems with those. One is the lack of sort of a lingua franca, for this. So a real common platform on top of which cloud software can be run. And the second one is vendor lock-in, right? So you putting all of your eggs in the basket of a cloud vendor could be risky, especially for a big company, right? Compared to maybe a like more fragmented ecosystem like we had in the past. The cloud native ecosystem, starting from Kubernetes and all of the other the other projects around Kubernetes, in my opinion, solve both of these problems very well, and there's no escape that they will be the way to do cloud in the future. So we're witnessing here, and we have the luck as Falco team and as Sysdig as a company, since we're also talking about the company, to be part of a giant revolution in software. This revolution will not be made by more, proprietary lock-in based kind of approaches. It will be made by projects that are community based, and it would be made by companies that support these projects and understand that serving their users also means offering essentially great ecosystem solutions that are completely open source, free, and extremely well integrated with the rest of the ecosystem. It's sort of hard to integrate with, I don't know, the AWS API, because again, it's or just their infrastructure, because it's proprietary. Well, I don't know, if you want to really bake security into Kubernetes, you work with the community. The Kubernetes community will listen to you. You will make proposals. You will discuss these proposals with them. If they will like these proposals, you will really have an opportunity to enhance in multiple ways Kubernetes to have better security, like runtime security with Falco. So that's why Sysdig is working on this. It's really at the core of our philosophy. We really strongly believe it's the present and the future, and we really believe that it's the best way to build not only a great community, but also a great business around this in the long term.
Awesome. Kris, I always consider, I'm sure you also consider yourself part of the, you work with Sysdig, but I always consider you part of the community. So from your perspective, I just want to hear, that when you look at a lot of ecosystem players are doing open source, what value does it bring when the companies, they open source their own projects, and engage with the community, they contribute, they become good citizens, versus the old days, when you would work at night in your free time to submit the patches and go back and work for some proprietary company in the daytime? How do you see this whole change?
I think the sentiment here is, if you look at the history of computer science, if you look at Kubernetes, if you look at Linux, open source software fundamentally sticks around, right? The ecosystem can move on, there's vendor neutrality, and we're able to take this open source software and we're able to actually grow a thriving, healthy community around it. And, in my experience anyway, seeing commercial products come and go over the years, but seeing tools like Linux stick around for decades, and, it's been a better part of my lifetime, I think is very important and very necessary to building out a functional tool.
So Loris and Kris, thanks once again for taking your time out and talking about the incubation of Falco. And I, wish you good luck with the graduation. We'll see you at KubeCon when it's in graduation. There'll be a big party. I'm pretty sure about that as well. And I look forward to seeing you again at some point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sounds good.